Right, good evening everybody. We'll make a start on the meeting. Welcome to Cabinet for the 25th of January. Good to see so many members of the Council, officers, members of the public here. You're all very welcome, and those people tuning in on the stream. First of all, fire alarm procedures. If the fire alarm is activated, vacate the officers via the stairs. Please do not use the lifts. Assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. Please switch off and turn to silent your mobile phones and do not make or receive calls while this meeting is in progress. Note that the meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and available later on the internet. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? No. So, the following members have asked to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1, and just for the benefit of those who are not familiar with how Cabinet meetings work, the members of the committee are myself and the members in the front row there. Other councillors are able to speak once on any item, but it isn't a debate. This can come across as being slightly strange if you're used to other kinds of council meeting. It's the way that council cabinets work up and down the country, and it's set out by law that it works in this way. So it's not a funny Thanet practice, but it is a bit odd. And if you haven't seen it before, you might find it a bit strange. The following members have asked to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1. Item 5, Councillor Rogers. Item 6, Councillors Warrow, Braidwood, Green, Austin, Davis, Cupp and Pugh. Item 8, Councillor Austin. Item 11, Councillors Austin, Davis and Pugh, and item 12, Councillors Austin and Davis. Are there any more requests from members to speak? Not seeing any. Thank you very much. Right. There are no apologies because Cabinet is all here. Does anyone have an interest to declare in the items of business on the agenda this evening? Councillor Whitehead.
As I am employed by Kent County Council working to support residents who are autistic or with complex needs, although I do not work in relation to highways, I will be excusing myself for the part of the Shotton item that refers to the KCC road. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead, and we will separate out the part of that item which talks about KCC and their plans for a road in order to facilitate that. Minutes of the previous meeting, members. Summary of recommendations and decisions of the Cabinet held on the 11th of January. Copies attached to the agenda pack. I propose we take the minutes as read. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Alban. Is that agreed, members? Agreed. Thank you. Moving on to the first substantive item, which is item 4, the draft corporate plan for 2024 to 28, and that's me. So the report in front of Cabinet this evening proposes a new corporate plan which intends to set the direction of travel for the Council over the next 4 years. Having a clearly defined plan is essential to support the Council to work towards achieving our longer-term aspirations for Thanet and to ensure that resources across the Council are focused on what matters most to local people. Having a clear and concise corporate plan will help us to ensure that the community and our stakeholders are aware of the work the Council is delivering, and through our regular reporting of our performance will have an oversight of the progress being made. The draft plan has now been out for public consultation for a period of 7 weeks, and my thanks to everyone who took the time to respond. There is encouragingly broad support for the proposed new priorities for the Council, which are: 1, to keep our district safe and clean; 2, to deliver the housing we need; 3, to protect our environment; 4, to create a thriving place; and 5, to work efficiently for you. As I've said before, these are clear statements which reflect the ongoing feedback that we receive from the public when they tell us that they want their streets to be kept clean, to be able to feel safe, and to have thriving towns in the district. My thanks also go to the Overview and Scrutiny Panel for their consideration of the draft plan at their meeting last week and for their support. Within our 10-year vision, we aspire to the prosperity of our residents increasing. And as such, I'd like to propose an addition to the draft corporate plan. This is to include a reference within our priorities which acknowledges the work the Council carries out with our partners to address the health inequalities which we know exist across the district. While we are not directly responsible for delivering those services, we have a key role to play in supporting this activity, and I think the plan should refer to this point. With this in mind, I move that Cabinet recommends the draft corporate plan, taking into account the proposed addition, for final approval at full council on Thursday, 8th of February. Do I have a seconder? I think Councillor Keane won the race. Thank you. Members, any comments? Okay. So that will come back to council. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Move on to the next item. Item 5, decision for a coastal and beach public spaces protection order, PSPO renewal to 2027. Councillor Alban.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This report covers the renewal of the beach and coastal PSPO, and for the members of the public, it's a public space protection order. That is what it's for. And this is for the period the 1st of April 2024 to the 31st of March 2027. An evaluation of the beach and coast PSPO for the period the 1st of April 2021 to the 31st of March 2024 has been completed. It found that the majority of beach users have followed the beach and coast PSPO code of conduct. Residents have a good understanding of the beach and coast PSPO, and visitors have a lesser understanding of the overall PSPO. The Council's beach and coast team have undertaken positive stakeholder relationships which have helped spread a wider awareness and understanding of the beach and coast PSPO. The Council has seen a decrease in complaints over the past 3 years. Breaches of PSPO have also decreased. If we do not renew the PSPO, our Blue Flag and Seaside Awards may not be renewed. Without the beach and coast PSPO, we shall struggle to protect our beach and coastal areas from antisocial behaviour. I would add at this point, Chair, that I'm extremely grateful for the work that our staff did last summer. I think what's happened over the last 3 years, which included the previous administration, and I'm not going to leave them out of it, and we are continuing and improving the work in relation to this. I recommend option 1 of the report, and that is that Cabinet approve the renewal of the current PSPO until the 30th of March 2027, as adopted in accordance with the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Allen, do you want a second now? Councillor Yates, thank you. And speaking number 20.1, we have Councillor Rogers.
Thank you, Leader. I am concerned that the public nuisance of visitors parking across people's drives as they go to the beach does not seem to be addressed. I'm aware that this problem comes up under an enforcement officer's remit, but 1.3 states that our local communities are impacted by antisocial behaviour currently. This inconsiderate parking particularly infuriates residents of Botany Bay and Kingsgate living close to the beach. I've read the Code of Conduct, so would it not be a good idea to add a request to park considerably to the Code of Conduct booklets that are handed out, and maybe an education officer might pick this up? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Rogers. I think, sorry? Oh, sorry. Oh, well, I'm in stereo, people, but thank you. One to do. I think what you have to take into account here is that when it comes to law on the highway, if there's no vehicle parked on a drive, anybody can park in front of that drive. That is not an offence, and it's not something that Thanet District Council enforcement officers can deal with. They also couldn't really deal with if they are blocked in on their drive. But I think where I live, up on Palm Bay, and I quite often walk down to Botany Bay in the summer, and I've seen it. I've seen them driving on the pavement going down and that. So we have taken as many steps as we can by telling people not to park down there because there isn't enough parking. Don't go down there. There's no, etc., etc. But I'm certainly happy to take that on board and to discuss that with officers. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any comments? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. It's not a very complicated recommendation, so I think we can probably repeat it. To approve the renewal of the current PSPO until the 30th March 2027 as adopted in accordance with the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014. Do members agree? Agree. Thank you. We move on to item 6, which is the land at Shottenden Road. And I shall lead off on this. The Council completed a Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment in 2019, which forms part of the evidence base for the Thanet Local Plan. The study is published on the Council's website. The assessment considered the accommodation needs of gypsies, travellers and travelling show people. The study identified the need for 7 permanent pitches and 5 transit pitches over the planned period to 2031. This need is driven entirely by the current and anticipated future needs of families already in the area and who are already an integral part of our community. The Council has a duty to plan for sites to meet these identified needs. Council already has a criteria-based policy in the existing adopted local plan that allows for planning applications to be considered and determined, and the details of this policy are set out in the report. This is not the first time that this Cabinet has considered the need for gypsy and traveller sites in the district. On the 16th of December 2019, Cabinet considered some potential options for a tolerated stopping site. A report was subsequently published ahead of the Cabinet meeting on the 30th of July 2020, which assessed a number of further sites, including the site at Shottenden Road. The report was deferred and not discussed. Cabinet then considered a further report at its meeting on the 17th of September 2020, when it was decided that the issue of site allocation would be considered as part of the local plan review. Since that time, in preparation for a review of the local plan, we have held a call for sites, specifically inviting submissions of land to provide for the need of gypsies and travellers, and the Council received no submissions. Additionally, the local plan update continues to be delayed as a result of a number of uncertainties, including about future housing numbers and how they should be calculated, and about the level of protection awarded to agricultural land through the National Planning Policy Framework. Further work on assessing suitable sites for gypsy and traveller provision was done by the Conservative administration between 2021 and 2023, and I understand that Cabinet members visited Shottenden Road then and identified it as a potential site, but the Council failed in a funding bid to take matters forward. The recommendation in this report is to undertake a public consultation about the potential to provide some gypsy and traveller pitches on the land at Shottenden Road. The submission of a planning application will be subject to the outcome of this consultation, which is in itself subject to a further period of consultation. The consultation responses that we receive from the process envisaged here will be brought back to this Cabinet for a further decision, which means that they will also go to overview and scrutiny before any planning application is submitted. It's fully recognised that the Shottenden Road site is currently used as agricultural land, and the report therefore recommends that Cabinet notes that no proposals for housing on the land could come forward ahead of the local plan review, by which time the number of homes that the Council will have to provide by 2040 and the level of protection provided to agricultural land through the National Planning Policy Framework may be clearer. So her housing, to be clear, does not form any part of the consideration tonight. Overview and scrutiny made 2 recommendations when it considered the report, which were around dealing with the outcome of the proposed consultation and delaying the consultation to look at other sites. Given that two different cabinets have previously looked at a long list of other sites, twice in the last 4 years, and the council has also conducted a call for sites for this use without success, this does not seem to me appropriate. In any event, more than one site is likely to be required, as set out in the report. In view of the public interest, however, and mindful of the need for transparency, I propose to amend recommendation 2 in the report in line with what I've said before, so that the public and members can be clear that the consultation responses will be brought back for consideration by this committee. The report also recommends the disposal of 2 areas of the site to Kent County Council to facilitate the new route of the inner circuit major road network. This route has itself been the subject of a major public consultation and is an integral part of the district's infrastructure needs. Now, in order to facilitate Councillor Whitehead's participation in this item, I'm going to take recommendations 1, 2 and 4 and then return to recommendation 3. So what I'm moving is 1, to conduct public consultation with the Gypsy and Traveller community and neighbouring residents about the proposal to establish a number of Gypsy and Traveller pitches on land off Shottenden Road, the area shown in Annex 6 to the report, and following the consultation, bring back to Cabinet, and prior that to the overview and scrutiny panel, any proposal arising from the consultation to submit an application for outlying planning permission for the provision of Gypsy and Traveller pitches on the land marked 1A in Annex 5. And 4, to note that proposals for the provision of housing on the wider Shottenden Road site could only be considered following the assessment of all land submitted to the Council as part of the call for sites and the completion of the current review of the Thanet local plan. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Yates. And before we go to 20.1, and I appreciate there are a number of members who wish to speak on it, I think it's right that Councillor Whitehead, who is our housing portfolio member, gives her take on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. As previously mentioned, I will only be speaking on the part of this item that refers to the consultation relating to Shottenden. I will not be present for discussion of the latter part of this item, as I work to support autistic residents and residents with complex needs within Kent County Council. And although the latter part of this item is unrelated to my KCC role, as it involves KCC, I will excuse myself after the discussion relating to the consultation. Tonight we are asked to make a decision on one thing and one thing only relating to this item: whether to have a consultation on the potential provision of a traveller site on a previously and comprehensively assessed site at Shottenden. We are not being asked to provide a site. We are not being asked to give permission for a site. We are being asked to allow residents to formally give their opinion on the possibility of providing a site. That is, quite literally, all that we are being asked to do. And I am never ever going to oppose residents being involved in decisions that should involve them. I am, I believe, known for being very open and very communicative. I'm not known in this chamber for being particularly partisan, mainly because I joined politics from a background of disliking conventional politics. I find oppositional politics to be destructive, as it focuses not on what we need to do, but on individual and collective political ambition, and it places facts and needs far behind political ambition and realities. I will not conduct myself in such a way, and although I am far from perfect, I will always be factual and I will do my best to be comprehensive. Tonight we are discussing a consultation on a site which has been assessed against national planning conditions and requirements. This site was also ranked as the best available site under the previous administration, and I know that they will have followed exactly the same planning requirements that we would consider now. Within planning, requirements are prescriptive and do not link to political will or influence in terms of interpretation. And bluntly, there are very good reasons that they shouldn't, as planning should be a measured and apolitical process in order to produce unbiased and fair results. Residents should know that planning considerations link to clear guidance, and that planning decisions are not made on a political basis. The evidence that this is the case is documented over the past years, with several administrations assessing this site as the best available site to meet planning needs, with no political difference in that assessment. As such, divisive narratives are unnecessary, although I accept that general politics will inevitably produce this, and has produced this. What is before us is a decision to consult, nothing more and nothing less. I talk probably too much in many cases, but it is because I want people to be well informed and to understand. This is why I am as responsive as I am and as willing as I am to face into discussions and decisions that can be challenging, as I do not believe that anything is solved by not facing into essential issues. The reality of local government is that all administrations face the same challenges, and in this case came to the same conclusion when trying to provide for a legal and moral duty. The only difference is that I am now speaking about the entire process, and I am very willing to have this discussion, however hard, and acknowledge not only the need we have, legally and morally, to provide sites, but also the need all residents have to discuss, express concerns, be heard, and understand what is being proposed. The way to do that effectively is to consult. Our need to plan for traveller sites is not going to go away and has to be explored and addressed. And I will not continually push back people's needs to have a home. Every home near this proposed site was once built on agricultural land, and the travelling community in this area has long-standing links and history with agriculture. We cannot have a discussion regarding the importance of agriculture on a site that, even if used in this way, could still offer agricultural tenancies in parts, while simultaneously denying the importance of providing for those who are culturally and historically linked to agriculture in this area, especially when no formal provision has been made for them before this point. I have seen and responded to many comments online stating that people are not being heard or listened to, when in fact the entire point of a consultation is to listen, and people cannot be formally heard without it. The two realities that we face here are not mutually exclusive. People have a right to a home, and people have a right to be heard. How we provide a site and where and what we need to consider and take into account is all part of the consultation process. And that process is one that should be and remain clear and calm, as that is what is deserved by an issue this significant. We are planning long-term for how our community works and how we support all of our residents. There is nothing more important than that, and ensuring that all residents and all communities are consulted is the very first part of doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. And I remind the members speaking under 20.1 of the rules, which basically entitle you to speak once, ask questions, make statements, say whatever you want to say, but it isn't a debate, and I don't think it will be helpful if we try and turn it into a debate. Councillor Warren.
Thank you, Leader. Good evening, Cabinet, good evening, members, and good evening, members of the public. I've recently been speaking to local tenant farmer Jonathan Tapp, whose family has been farming in Garlinge for generations. Farmer Tapp is devastated by the news that he's being kicked off of his farmland. And I want to know why this greenfield, grade agricultural land, we were talking about agricultural land earlier, but the difference is this is grade 1, the said agricultural land wasn't. Why is this green land being singled out when brownfield sites, such as the former Hoverport site in Cliffs End, were not considered? And also, I'd like to seek clarity for recommendation 4 that once adopted, the public consultation will only be done once the assessment of all land submitted has been completed. Thank you for allowing me to speak, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. I'll bring Councillor Whitehead in. As you've referred publicly to the Hoverport site, and you've made a false claim on your Facebook page, which I've told you is a false claim, that I have personally intervened to reject the Hoverport site. Let's be clear that the Hoverport site is on a long list of sites which was considered by the Council in 2019-20 and by the Conservative administration which left office last year, and that nobody has ever put forward the Hoverport site as a viable site. It has never been ranked, and in fact I think in the initial ranking it was bottom of a list of about 14 sites. There's certainly been no discussion under this administration in the last year about the Hoverport site whatsoever, other than that prompted by you. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Warrow. In relation to Mr Tapp, I'm not sure if he's present, but I don't particularly like speaking about people when they're not here. I have been also speaking to Mr Tapp, have invited him to a meeting to discuss both the site and the future of the site, as he was also invited to previously when the site was put forward. He has accepted that meeting. I am very, very happy to have that. And that meeting, as it could have done previously, will also cover discussions of long leases of part of the site and short-term leases of other parts. The reason for the termination of the lease links to the fact that all of this land is linked under the current lease. I can't discuss the KCC related part, but clearly there are difficulties around the separation of that which require a new lease. But we are going to have discussions with Mr Tapp, and as I've said, I've welcomed that and invited him to meet several times. Thank you.
Councillor Braidwood.
Thank you, Chair. The local plan, the bedrock in which all planning decisions are made within this council, contains policy H020. This policy specifically gives guidance for site and accommodation for gypsy and travelling communities and gives 4 points to consider when identifying suitable land. My question is this: why has this particular plot of land, as Shottendane Road, been identified when it doesn't adhere to point 3, which states, and I quote, not within a flood risk, and point 4, which states, and I quote, will not have an unacceptably detrimental impact on local environmental quality, including green wedges or sensitive landscape areas? Thank you.
Mr Porter, do you want to comment on that, please?
Thank you, Leader. Well, just a couple of points, really. The first one is to say that if and when any planning application is considered, and it would have to be considered by the Planning Committee because of the Council's interest in this site, these would be the criteria that the Planning Committee would use to make a judgment about the suitability of any proposal. In terms of the specifics, the site is not within the identified flood risk areas within the district, so I'm not quite sure where that information is, that it is a flood risk area. Clearly, I'd be happy to have a further conversation about that, but it's not within the identified flood risk areas in the local plan. And on the third point, well, it's not within the green wedges or the identified areas of sensitive landscape, but clearly there would be a judgment made by both the planning officers and the planning committee about whether any proposal had a detrimental impact.
Thank you. Councillor Green.
Yeah, thank you. I thought I would try to reflect what overview and scrutiny thought of this in the absence of Councillor Fellows. Feels in a far better place now than being here. He's on holiday. I think the committee thought about fairness and transparency. And I think 2/3 of this proposal for the road and for housing, we were in agreement with what's being proposed. And the housing land being considered along with all other bits of housing land seemed to me a fair way of, or seemed to us a fair way of dealing with these matters. I accept that this land and other land in Thanet has been looked at before, but the criteria used and the results of those looks isn't in the paper that was brought forward, and I don't think we can expect residents to know what happened months and years ago and how this land has been selected for this special treatment. So the committee felt that rather than just consult on this piece of land, council should collect together the evidence that most of which has been collected before, but there may still be new pieces of land if a new call was made. And then transparently judge all those pieces of land against the criteria that needs to be used. We recognised that the council does need to provide land for travellers, if only to comply with government regulations. But from the point of view of the residents, they want to see, and they want to see now, that this land is being treated along with all others that could possibly be used.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I can't speak to the transparency or otherwise of the discussions that the Conservative administration had. I know that there was a scrutiny committee in the 2019-20 Council panel report which went to overview and scrutiny and then went to Council, to Cabinet, as I outlined in my introduction. There's quite a lot of information in the public domain about that. I think the other challenge is that we need more than one site. That's what we're requested to provide. We're not suggesting that we would be able to deliver all the provision that's needed on this site. I mean, we could suggest that, but we're not suggesting that. We think that a better approach is to have a number of different sites and that those sites are smaller. So the reality is that we are going to have to look for other sites as well over time. So I think taking that into account and given the amount of work that's been done previously at looking at other sites in the district, I'm not sure that going off and looking at other places is going to make any difference to the proposal to bring this forward for consultation. But we need to see what the outcome of the consultation is. We want to hear from the local residents. We also want to hear from the Gypsy and Traveller community about what their needs are and what they think about it, because they have a voice too. And when we've got that information, we will bring it back and discuss it further. And I think that's where we are. But I understand your point about transparency, but I would say there's a lot of information in the public domain already. And the thing about land is it doesn't move, does it? The sites are what they are. Some of them will get developed and will move on to different uses, but generally speaking, the long list of sites is pretty informative. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that. No.
Could I just,
Paul, did you want to say?
could I just say something on that? Would it be possible to bring that information that already exists forward and publish it so that residents can see it?
Well, as I say, the information relating to the 2019-20 discussions is all in the public domain. It's on the council's website. I'm sure we can make it more available. I'd have to have a conversation with officers about work done by the Conservative administration because I don't know what the propriety of that is. And they can no doubt speak to themselves and probably will. Mr. Porter.
Well, I don't think I've got very much to add to that, but just to confirm that the previous evaluations that were done in 2019 are available on the council's website. They might not be the easiest to find because they're within the agenda papers and minutes of the Cabinet at the time and the overview and scrutiny panel at the time. I think what we can undertake to do is make those more easy to find on the website, so that if anybody wants to look at those, they don't have to search around, they can find them more easily. So I'm sure we can do that.
Moving on, Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Leader. As a Green Party councillor, I inevitably regret any plans to do anything with agricultural land other than grow food on it. But on the other hand, as a councillor who's been working with traveller families for some years now, having had a group of families literally dumped in my ward, I have become acutely aware of the need for these sites and the fact that we have let the traveller community in Thanet down by not providing sites. So I very much welcome the consultation, but I think the point needs to be made, as we tried to make at scrutiny the other week, that this is just the beginning of a process, and it's about listening to what everybody wants to say. The tenant farmers, the residents, the members of the traveller community. And I think it's very important that we listen to all those views and take them on board. And I think there has been a lot of unhelpful messaging on social media to suggest that this is a done deal. I think it's perfectly clear that it's not a done deal, and I very much welcome Cabinet's transparency on this, and I'm very pleased to hear Mr Porter say that he will put the criteria into a place on the website where it's easy to find, because I think we do have a tendency, both as councillors and officers, to say, it's on the website, and it actually turns out to be in some obscure corner that you couldn't possibly find unless you happen to have been there at that particular meeting 5 years ago. So thank you very much for that, and I look forward to participating in the consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. I don't think that requires any comment from me. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Leader. It's an interesting scenario here, because we do have a liability and a responsibility, obviously, however, not just to the travellers but to the community at large, and for the best interests of everybody. Having been elected on a mandate of protecting agricultural land, I think it's fair to say where my heart lies on this, and that has no response or no relationship to any individual. However, there seem to be a few sort of anomalies here. I did ask last week, I believe it was, about the total acreage required to accommodate with permanent and temporary pitches. I don't know if we have that figure yet, but I have to observe that if we don't know that acreage yet, then I don't see how we can consult or a decision can be taken, because we need to know what is required. Otherwise, we're just scratching the fingernail and not solving the problem, which it clearly is a problem if this is the only site that's been identified to date. I don't see how we can provide several smaller sites, because land doesn't just magic out of nowhere, obviously. So I think part of this discussion needs to be what is actually necessary and needed. I would implore the council to look for non-greenfield sites to accommodate not just the travellers but as much development as possible. And we need to protect our high-grade agricultural land. In addition, it may not legally be defined as green wedge, but it does provide a green break between the urbanisations of Garlinge and Shottendane, and to conurbate between them totally changes the character of the area and everything. So it does have implications in terms of people's lives on a day-to-day basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. I take the point that the size of land allocated is relevant to the consultation. I'm not sure, given that we know its rough proportions in relation to the overall site, is necessary for us to make a decision to carry out a consultation. Well, I'll ask Mr Poulter if he's able to elaborate.
Well, I think the key thing is the answer that I gave at the overview and scrutiny panel, is that the site area requirement very much depends on the number of pitches that would come forward in any proposal, and that is very much subject to consultation. And neighbouring residents and the Gypsy and Traveller community will have a view about the number of pitches that would potentially be provided in the same place. And I know that is particularly an issue for the travelling community themselves, about how family sites work on the appropriate scale. So I don't think we can answer the question directly at this stage until we've had those conversations about what any proposal might look like in terms of the number of pitches. We do have information, and it's available nationally. There's national guidance about the area for individual pitches, which I'd be more than happy to share with you. What I can say is that a pitch in that guidance represents enough land for 2 caravans and 2 vehicles. Obviously that multiplies up if it's a number of pitches.
Thank you. Councillor Cupp.
Thank you, Leader. I am cautious not to repeat what's already been said, but I just wanted to give my interpretation of the overview and scrutiny panel and the recommendation that was brought forward, because consultation absolutely is right, and it needs to be done to ensure that the public are not just notified, but also so their voices are heard. But I would also argue that we as councillors are here to represent our residents, and we listen to our residents, we talk to our residents, and they give us a viewpoint. And on that overview and scrutiny panel, we put forward a recommendation to ensure that there was a hold on consulting on just one site, and rather consult on multiple sites, one saving time for the council and possibly money, but also showing that there is other possibilities available. And I think what's also important is that the overview and scrutiny panel was a cross-party agreement. It was proposed by Councillor Green and seconded by myself, and every member on that committee agreed with that recommendation. And I think overview and scrutiny is incredibly important to ensure that all the council is being heard when items are being brought forward and are being either agreed by Cabinet. And it's not very often that you get recommendations brought forward by overview and scrutiny on things, but as we've seen by the public reaction to this, it was right that the overview and scrutiny put forward recommendations. And my fear is, if the Cabinet tonight don't take forward the recommendation that overview and scrutiny put forward, how can the public seem to trust the Cabinet if they aren't even listening to the overview and scrutiny committee? Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you, Councillor Cupp. I mean, in terms of adding to what I said earlier, the reality is that Cabinet is the decision-making body and overview and scrutiny is an advisory body. If Cabinet was bound to accept every recommendation from overview and scrutiny, then there'd be no point in having Cabinet. We would simply send decisions to overview and scrutiny and they could decide. And that's not how the system works, and you know it's not how the system works. This administration has taken the decision to put all key decisions in front of overview and scrutiny before we make a decision. That hasn't been the case necessarily in the past. I think it's a good approach. I welcome the discussion. I think there have been some very useful discussions on a number of matters at overview and scrutiny, which has informed the Cabinet decisions that have been taken. I think it's a better way of making policy. I think in this case, I would argue that the recommendations of overview and scrutiny are somewhat confusing in that it appears to agree with conducting a public consultation, but basically saying not making a decision arising from that consultation and not actually doing the consultation now, but going off and carrying out another process of assessing sites. So I don't think that the conclusions as presented to me, and unfortunately, due to the fact the streaming service wasn't working, I couldn't watch it, and I would have watched it because I wanted to hear what members had to say. I don't think that those recommendations are particularly coherent as presented to me, and that may or may not be how the meeting expressed itself. But we understand that this is a matter of significant public interest, particularly in the Garlinge area, and we will continue to engage and listen to what people are saying to us. Councillor Pugh.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and be brief, as there's a lot to go through, and I don't want to rehash over what's already been discussed by everyone. But I do think I've got a few questions to ask on this Shottendane Road site, and then there's a few points of clarification that I'd like to make, particularly to do with the previous Conservative administration and what we potentially did or did not do. My first question is, particularly in relation to this site, is that Cabinet is deciding tonight to consult on one site and one site only, and I agree with the recommendations that Overview Scrutiny put forward, in that actually I think it would be better to consult on a variety of sites. I know that there are more sites that we as the previous administration looked at. Cabinet toured a variety of sites, this site being one of them, in the last administration. But more importantly, I think it's important that the council, if we really care about consultation on what residents think, and I concede that yes, we do need to have a legal site, because otherwise we'll continue to be victim of illegal encampments and the issues that come with that, and particularly for nearby residents when travellers kind of pull up in car parks or in parks and our green spaces and stuff like that. But I do think it's important, if we really care about consultation, that we consult on all potential possible sites, particularly if, as is being admitted tonight, is that even if this site does come forward and it's created as a traveller site, that won't be enough to meet local needs. Secondly, and again, particularly just on the consultation for this site, I'd like confirmation on what the council will do if residents respond to the consultation that they don't want this site to be there and that they don't think it's suitable. What will TDC as an authority decide to do? Will we then decide to just ignore what residents have said? Because I think consultation, the word consultation has probably, yes, thank you. The word consultation has probably been used more, not just by me, but by everyone that's spoken tonight. It's consultation, 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 consultation. This is a consultation. Well, that's all very well and fine, but if residents respond that they don't agree with this and they don't want it, and we then as a council decide to ignore them and say, actually, we know best and this needs to be a gypsy and traveller site, then really I question the point of us holding the consultation if we're not going to then take into consideration and act on residents' views. Councillor Cupp is incredibly right, and I don't normally admit that I agree with Councillor Cupp so often, but you know, we've been elected, I know it does make a change, but we've been elected to represent our residents, and to represent them as best we can, and I appreciate that we need to make difficult decisions sometimes, but to hold a consultation that's only a consultation in name only, for the sake of ensuring that we then have a legal gypsy and traveller site, I think is quite a pointless task. Now, to provide clarity on what the previous Conservative administration may or may not have done, and I feel that it's probably been confirmed tonight, my suspicions of what had been said on social media by other elected councillors that aren't Conservatives over the last few weeks, that this administration is keen to blame the Conservative administration for why this site is being brought forward, why this consultation is being started, and why we're clearly, or this administration is clearly in the mess that they are. That's not the case. It's not true. The Conservative Cabinet toured a variety of sites. This was one of them, I believe, last year. But the years are kind of flying by quite quickly now, so I do apologise if I've got that wrong by a year or two. There were a variety, thank you, Councillor Bayford has confirmed it was last year, so I'm not going mad. We've toured a variety of sites. This was one of those sites. Before that, there was a working group, I believe, that was set up under the previous Labour administration, to decide or to look at and examine a much wider number of sites. Now, I know Councillor Warrior has referenced the Hoverport site and down at Pegwell. I'll be honest, and I'm not trying to add wood to the fire or stoke any tensions, but I do not remember at any time when the previous administration considered any options ever seeing the Hoverport on a list. Now, I'm not trying to blame anyone for that, but when that was then mentioned, that was complete news to me. So I'm not questioning whether it's suitable or not, or if we should go for that, but I can say categorically I've never seen it mentioned on any list of potential sites. But when it comes to us touring the sites, no decision was made by the previous Conservative administration about what site would be suitable or what site should be pursued first. If it had have been, I'd be very uncomfortable, and I know it's easy for me to say this now I'm in opposition, but I'd be very uncomfortable with putting a consultation forward for only one site. And I think, again, as has been admitted tonight, if we do need more than one site, and we know that we need more than one site, and that this site won't be enough, then surely we should be consulting on enough sites to cover that need. And I think that residents deserve that, because from what we've seen of the local reaction in Garlinge, is that this, of course, is potential. And I know it's hard for us to break news to residents that we're going to launch consultation. This has obviously been unwelcome news, and it has blindsided residents. And of course, if we're now going to try and identify other sites and put forward other consultations, we're going to have the same problem again. Whereas I think that actually it would be better to do it all in one go. Let's consult on multiple sites and see what residents say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pugh. I think what I'd like to make clear, this isn't about blaming the previous administration, but I think it's also fair that the public know that this issue has been explored by the previous Cabinet, that there is a list of sites, and that Shottendane was ranked highly in that list. And I don't think, it wouldn't be appropriate for us to conceal that, and at the same time, you must speak for yourself for what your administration did. The reason that Shottendane is coming forward is because it's in the council's ownership. There are challenges with other sites which were ranked, as I understand it, by the Conservative Cabinet. Some of them are not in the council's ownership. Some of them perhaps been designated for other things. So it's not simply a question of listing out all the available sites and asking the public to comment on them, because there's absolutely no point in asking the public to comment on a site that the council doesn't control and can't get access to. I will correct you. The document that I have seen, which ranks 9 sites, I think, lists another 8 sites which were not considered for ranking because they're not possibly viable. I don't actually have any strong opinion about the Hoverport. It's a bit of a myth that I live next to it. I don't, and you can look that up on the map. The Hoverport site, unfortunately, is clearly a flood risk, and it's next to a triple SI, and it's also, as I understand it, contaminated. The council doesn't have a plan for that site. I wish we did, because it's a big piece of recovered land which is going to waste. It's very difficult to know what can be done with it. But it is on the list of sites that were considered in 2019-20. It was ranked bottom of all the sites by the scoring through objective criteria, and it is on the list of sites that I've seen that was put before the Conservative Cabinet. Now, we can consider that document outside the meeting if you like, Councillor Pugh. I'm not proposing to publish that document. I don't think it's for me to publish it, but I'll take advice on that. In terms of listening to a consultation, I think it's important to understand that a consultation is not a referendum. Planning process incorporates consultation. The fact that hundreds of people may object to a particular planning application doesn't mean that that planning application can't be approved if it meets the planning criteria and the person who owns the site wants to do it. You don't get a vote over your neighbour's property. The real purpose of a consultation is to hear the practical reasons why something should not go ahead. So I do understand the concern of residents in Garlinge in particular about these proposals. What you need to tell us is why you object, what the impacts would be on you, and then we can take them into account. Simply telling us you don't want it wouldn't really suffice. And the same goes for the travellers. We need to ask them, what do they want? How will it work for them? Is it the right place for them? That's what the consultation is. I'm certainly not prejudging what the council would do next. We would look at the results of the consultation, we will publish the results of the consultation, and we will consider it in at least 2 public forums. So you have that assurance. This is a discussion. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from the travellers. And I know it's a difficult subject, and you know I pay tribute to members for the reasoned and measured way in which they've conducted it this evening. They've conducted discussions this evening, and thank the public for their. I thank the public for listening, because it's important, and it's important that we listen to you. But it's a difficult issue. We understand it's a difficult issue, but we can't keep going round in circles. We have to come to some conclusion. That's where we're trying to go. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Leader. I'd just like to come back on the blame point, because I want to be very, very clear, and I think I have been clear. And I think I have been very clear online that this is not about blame, but rather it is about consensus, and whether people want to admit consensus is something else entirely. But to go back to the first part of my speech, the reality of local government is that all administrations face the same challenges, and in this case came to the same conclusion when trying to provide for a legal and moral duty. The only difference is that I am speaking about the entire process, and I'm very willing to have the discussion, however hard, and acknowledge not only the need we have legally and morally to provide sites, but also the need all residents have to discuss, express concerns, be heard, and understand what is being proposed. In context of what did happen, the sites were ranked between April 22 and March 23, with site visits, as you said, on the 29th of April. And I would like to make the point that a funding bid was submitted for the Shottendane site during your administration, but wasn't successful. That indicates that you thought that that site had priority, or it would not have been submitted. So I very much take issue with being painted as being oppositional in this sense, when actually I'm simply being truthful about processes that weren't made visible. I am going to be visible. I am more than happy, as you will have seen on social media, to talk about all of this. But I don't think it's anything that I should be condemned for. I think being open is important, and I think being truthful is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Leader. I think it might be useful, potentially, if I can ask the officers just to explain the next steps of the process. So the consultation we've amended tonight, so it will come back here to Cabinet. Do you have any idea of timeline, how long the consultation will take, and when we could expect that Cabinet meeting back here to be, as I think that would be useful information to share today if we can. Thanks.
Yeah, Mr. Porter.
We haven't discussed the specific timeline for any consultation. I think that's the next step. Clearly, we would need to provide sufficient time for people to understand what's being discussed and consider their view and submit any comments that they would like us to consider. We'd need to provide time in that timeline for officers to review the comments that come back and report those comments back through the overview and scrutiny panel and back to Cabinet. I'm a bit reluctant to give a definite timescale now, because we haven't discussed that. Roughly, I mean, we could probably do that within a 3-month period, I would have thought, to give everybody proper time to participate in that.
Okay. I mean, I think it's important also to be clear that even if the consultation came back and said it's a fantastic idea, and Cabinet moved ahead and asked officers to submit a planning application, the planning process itself takes time, and at the end of the planning process, there still isn't any funding on the table. So we haven't identified how this project would be funded if it was taken forward. What we do think is that we'd be more likely to get the funding if there was actually a site that had planning consent, because I think that was possibly the challenge that officers faced before. Right, members. It's been moved and seconded that, and I will repeat the recommendations that we're voting on, to conduct public consultation with the Gypsy and Traveller community and neighbouring residents about the proposal to establish a number of Gypsy and Traveller pitches on land off of Shottendane Road. Following the consultation, to bring back to Cabinet and prior to that to the overview and scrutiny panel any proposal arising to submit an application for outlying planning permission for the provision of Gypsy and Traveller pitches on the land marked 1A. And to note that proposals for the provision of housing on the wider Shottendane Road site can only be considered following the assessment of all land submitted to the Council as part of the call for sites and the completion of the current review of the Thanet local plan. Is that agreed, members? Thank you. I invite Councillor Whitehead to leave. But don't go too far. Members, recommendation 3 is to dispose of part of the land at Shottendane Road, the areas marked as 1B and 2B on Annex 5, to Kent County Council for the proposed major road network inner circuit improvements and a linked sustainable drainage scheme, and I so propose. So a seconder, please. Councillor Yates. Members, do you wish to speak on this? Thank you. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Yeah. Councillor Whitehead. Oh, she shut the door. Can you get Councillor Whitehead? Thank you. Members of the public, you're entirely welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. If you wish to leave, we won't take offence. That's entirely up to you. We do have a long list of items to consider. And can I thank you for your attendance and courtesy this evening? We move on to item 7, which is the temporary staff contract, and that's Councillor Alban.
It's me. All the best stuff. Thank you, Chair. The current contract to provide the Council with temporary staff is due to expire on the 14th of April 2024. It is a 3-year contract with a 1-year extension option. This extension was exercised in April of last year. Temporary or agency staff are required to replace staff that are off through annual leave or sickness, often at short notice, and also to cover seasonal variations such as additional beach cleaning in the summer and also for the emptying of our massive amount of waste that we have on the seafronts. The current annual spend of this contract is approximately 1.3 million per annum. 80% of this cost is attributed to the cleansing service. It should be noted that this is a call-down contract with no obligation to spend the projected 1.3 million. The contract has not been awarded. This decision is requesting approval for it to be procured via an agreed framework. And as part of this process, a full review will be conducted into the use of agency staff within Thanet District Council. I therefore propose, Chair, option 3 of the report, which is as follows. Further competition under a framework of a 3-year contract with a 12-month extension option with a value of approximately 1.3 million per annum. This option is resource intensive and rates may not be as favourable when compared across managed service providers procured under the framework. That's the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Alban. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Duckworth? Any discussion, members? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Move on to item 8, fees and charges. Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Leader. Fees and charges were originally presented to Cabinet on October 2023 as part of the main budget report in order to support the 24-25 budget setting process, and were subsequently taken to overview and scrutiny panel earlier this month. Work undertaken looked to ensure that charges would remain competitive and that income budget expectations were realistic, allowing us to manage existing shortfalls of actual income against budget. I made overview and scrutiny aware of the fundamental changes to our assumptions around fees and charges, these being a review of our fee increase and, where possible, bringing these to nearer 5% from the 8%. As a result, the budget for 24-25 now includes the allocation of £116,000 to help facilitate this. The revised annex to this report, being the detailed schedule, was not available for the overview and scrutiny meeting, and I agreed it would be brought to Cabinet at the end of January for consideration. The main changes relate to the parking, bin replacement, garden waste and the crematorium fees. At overview and scrutiny, there were comments made about community event charges, and I can confirm that as per the annex, application fees for community events, together with the day rate costs for community, charity and commercial events, have been frozen, so there is no increase in these community event costs. However, given the difficulty splitting out parking charges for events from wider parking fees and charges, the suspension of parking bay charges for events cannot be frozen for community events. I move the recommendations in the report, this being that Cabinet consider the fees and charges as set out and agrees to make the recommendations to Council for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Yates.
Chair, for a change.
Councillor Alban has seconded. Almost got him before the recommendation.
Just for a
Before
change.
the motion was made, I think. Okay, Councillor Austin under 20.1, please.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Yates. And first of all, congratulations on managing to establish this in a way that works with the increase in the cost of living, etc. We have a couple of concerns or questions, and some of this is obviously going to go into the parking review. We know that traders in Ramsgate in particular are very concerned about increased parking charges, and we don't seem to have a facility in our town for half an hour's free parking in the way that some other towns in Thanet do, and we'd really like to see something like that built into the parking review so that everybody has space where people can pop in quickly to town and buy a loaf of bread or whatever. Our other area that we would like to point out, yes, or walk, indeed, were our towns safe to do so. The other thing that we have mentioned, I think, already in discussion with the leader and yourselves is we'd like to see, if our top priority and the top priority identified by our residents is clean and safe streets, we'd like to see them safer in terms of parking, but we'd also like to see them cleaner in terms of litter, and we'd like to see much higher penalties, as are allowed by government, for littering, for fly tipping, for graffiti, and for fly posting, which, as we pointed out to the leader, the main culprit in Ramsgate is Dreamland. So we'd like to see them fined substantially for covering all our public buildings and spaces with their posters. We don't quite understand why we haven't gone for higher charges, fixed penalty charges on some of those areas, which would make, we believe, an appreciable deterrent effect for people who are seeking to blight our environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Do you want to reply to that, Councillor Yates? I think a lot of it comes under the parking review, certainly the first part.
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor Austin. So the half an hour free parking, yeah, that'll fall under the parking review. I don't know the timelines of that, but I think we can. I'll revert to an officer for the timelines for that. Thank you.
It was a name I've forgotten.
Thank you, Councillor. So the consultation period for the parking strategy, the first engagement session is next week. So yeah, that starts next week for elected members, and then there are further sessions, I think first week of, or second week of February, public engagement session. So I haven't got the date at the end of the engagement sessions to hand, but it certainly starts next week.
And just coming back on the question of fines, so that's one of the first questions I asked when I got involved in fees and charges. If you go through the spreadsheet, there's a blue column which separates out discretionary and statutory charges. So a lot of the fines that we offer are unfortunately statutory, but if there are specific ones which are discretionary, which you think should be higher, then I'm happy to have those conversations. We can always amend fees and charges in year if we do get agreement, but it wouldn't be typical. But yeah, if there are specific points on that, but from my understanding, a lot of them are set by government and we do charge the maximum. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Yates. I mean, I'm sure officers will be happy to have a word with Dreamland if they are particularly causing a problem with fly posting. I think one of the challenges around some of the other offences that Councillor Austin's referred to is enforcing them. It's quite difficult to enforce against people dropping litter because you've got to find them doing it and you've got to have people out there to do it. And I'd sometimes think that people who advocate this would not actually like the level of surveillance that would be necessary for the fines to act as an effective deterrent. But I do understand, we all understand the problem, and you know, my particular beef, I'm afraid, is graffiti and driving around Ramsgate. Almost every item of public infrastructure, signs, Royal Mail boxes, BT boxes, appears to be tagged, and we intend to get to grips with that through the budget process, or certainly to make a difference, and that's very much part of our plans. Members, it's been moved and seconded to recommend the fees and charges as set out to Council. Does anybody else want to say anything? In that case, is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We move on to item 9, which is the East Kent Services Transition Programme Business Case for Approval, which is Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Leader. Cabinet will note from the report that Civica has provided revenue, benefits and customer services functions to Canterbury, Dover and Thanet Council as a shared service since 2018. Civica have now indicated the intention to cease providing such services after the expiry of the current contract in January 2025. Cabinet is being asked to agree in principle that in future these services be provided by way of a LATCO. The detailed report sets out the business case. However, Cabinet is being asked to agree that a further business plan be brought back to Cabinet for approval once details, including details such as the share arrangements, are known. Therefore, it is recommended that Cabinet 1. Note that the contract between East Kent Shared Service and Civica Limited for the delivery of the revenue, benefits and customer services will terminate in March 2025. 2. Note the content of the service transition case as Annex 1 of the report and agree in principle to the formation of a joint local authority trading company together with Canterbury and Dover for the delivery of the services referred to in point 1 above. And 3. Agree that a further report will be presented to Cabinet for approval within 4 months together with a detailed business plan for the proposed company, a draft shareholder agreement and proposed articles of association. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Yates. Is there a second? Councillor Duckworth. Members, any comments? Okay, I'd like to thank Ms Chohan for her work in putting together the business case. That's appreciated. I don't think you're going to get asked any questions. But thank you for coming. Members, is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Item 10, the purchase of 7 homes at Northwood Road, Broadstairs for affordable rent. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Leader. We have a duty to not only look after those residents who are already within the protection afforded by a council tenancy, but also expand this care to those who are currently within insecure and unaffordable private tenancies. Our new acquisition strategy, which has provided for the acquisition of 123 homes in 5 months, up from an average annual delivery of 18 homes per year over the last 10 years, is a perfect example of how using our HRA and thinking creatively around our abilities can produce outstanding outcomes for residents. With this purchase, we are not only providing a balanced mix of much-needed homes, including 3-bed houses, but we are also providing them in St Peter's Ward, which, as with some of our previous acquisitions, is a difficult area to access in terms of affordable tenancies. Using our new strategy and working consciously to support all of our residents across housing sectors has produced an approach that is producing genuinely affordable homes across Thanet. And again, I recommend Ms Jackson and her officers wholeheartedly for the level of work that has gone into and continues to go into this project. I move the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Wyatt. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Yates. Any comments, members? Okay, well, I would just say how encouraging it is to see still more new affordable homes coming in front of this committee, and I would say long may that continue. Members, is that agreed? Thank you. We move on to item 11, which is the Ramsgate Regeneration Programme, which is me. So, the Council has secured 22.5 million of government funding for regeneration projects in Ramsgate. This includes both the Future High Streets Fund at 2.7 million and the Ramsgate Levelling Up Fund at 19.8 million. Along with Margate regeneration funds, on which we'll be reporting next month, these programmes were part of a complex array of central government grants with different timescales and reporting requirements. The Government invited the Council to participate in its Simplification Pathfinder pilot with the aim of simplifying project approval and reporting arrangements and setting a more realistic timescale for project delivery of March 2026. Should probably say that's the backstop date. We're not proposing that we won't be delivering any projects until then. This was an opportunity to reset the programme, and on the 21st of September 2023, Cabinet approved a new investment plan setting out the updated programme, which has subsequently been approved by Government. The programme in Ramsgate focuses on projects that provide creative workspace, improve the public realm and connectivity between the harbour and the town, improve the port and harbour itself, and create opportunities for skills development and job creation. The report provides details of each of the 10 projects currently in the programme and an update on progress. There are no decisions to be made tonight. The purpose of this report is to set out publicly some of the issues that we will need to address in due course. This funding represents a significant step up in the scale of the Council's Regeneration Capital Programme. At the time of the bid submissions and funding awards, the Council was not adequately resourced to deliver a programme at this scale. Therefore, it has been essential for the Council to employ additional project management officers and appoint construction design teams to deliver the programme. As everybody knows, we've also experienced a period of high inflation. Although reasonable assumptions were made about inflation, we could not have anticipated the 20 to 30% increases in construction costs that we've actually seen. And this is common across the whole of the National Levelling Up programme. At the time of the central government bidding rounds, many projects submitted for funding across the national bidding programme were only at concept stage, with only high-level projections of costs and timelines. Considerable work has been completed to develop the original programme concepts into deliverable projects with updated costs and delivery timelines, and we've also learned more about the likely viability of some of the projects proposed. It's not just a question of whether the initial investment is possible within the funding envelope provided, but in some cases whether the proposed use would be achievable or sustainable. In this respect, I have arranged to meet the Thanet Fishermen's Association to ensure that I understand at first hand their position on that project and how we can best support them. I recently had the opportunity to visit the Clock House, which has now returned to council control, and I'm confident from talking to representatives of the Ramsgate Heritage Regeneration Trust and the Ramsgate Society, as well as our officers and project leads, that we're not only going to be able to safeguard the historic building, but also provide something really special in it. And I know from speaking regularly to the staff at the Newington Community Centre how positive they are about the works planned there. I've also seen firsthand the potential at 5A Broad Street. We're working through the Royal Institute of Architecture's design stages for each project. This provides a much improved understanding of the design and outcomes, project timelines and the estimated cost. This work is continuing, and importantly we have commissioned a detailed condition survey and costed schedule of works for the port infrastructure project. We know that the cost of this project will exceed the original grant allocation, and the outcome of this work will provide much greater clarity about these costs. It will also be aligned with our process to appoint an operator in order to ensure that major investment is only made to meet the demand which we remain confident now exists. We will also explore other options to fund the port infrastructure and are already engaging with government on a strategic level in view of the pressures on Dover and its motorway access corridor. Overall, inflation has put pressure on the affordability of the full programme, but most projects remain deliverable, and where they may not be, that is not just about the upfront cost. It's inevitable that we will have to make some difficult decisions about the final programme over the coming months and use the flexibility provided to the Council as part of the Simplification Pathway pilot to switch funds between projects where this is necessary. We've already committed to not moving funds from Margate to Ramsgate or from Ramsgate to Margate, but within each town adjustments will be required. At this stage, Cabinet is simply asked to note the progress made and challenges which have emerged. The report will also progress on to the overview and scrutiny panel so that it can be further discussed. Importantly, each individual project will be considered by the overview and scrutiny panel and Cabinet before being approved once complete information about project design, outcomes, timelines and costs are known. I move the recommendations as set out in the report. I've got to remember. I'm sure I've got Councillor Austin and Councillor Davis. I've just got to find the right bit of paper that's written on. I'm going to call on Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Luda. I wanted to say that we're very pleased in our corner of the chamber to see the detailed report, which obviously as scrutiny members some of us have been asking for some time. We found the briefing very useful the other week and we're grateful to officers and members for their hard work on this. We're encouraged by the positive progress on many of the projects. We are getting a lot of pushback from residents about the ferry operation and about money being diverted into the ferry operation from other areas. And one of the things that we would find helpful would be to see a separation of the costs of our providing the port and harbour that we are statutorily required to provide on the one hand, and the costs of a potential ferry operation on the other. And it may be that that's in the documentation, but I'm not aware of it if it is, so I haven't spotted it. It would be really helpful to have that, and it would be really helpful to be able to explain that to residents, because people are concerned that what they see as projects that will benefit them straightforwardly in Ramsgate as residents and as businesses, like the Smack Boys project, for example, are potentially being dropped in favour of work on a ferry which may not happen. And obviously Ramsgate residents are a bit cynical about ferry, having had previous experience in this area. I'm pleased to see that we're still considering possibilities for the Smack Boys building, because personally it's one of my favourite buildings in Ramsgate, and there's many, many beautiful buildings in Ramsgate, so it's got quite a lot of competition. But we are concerned that if Blueberry Homes, who sold their flats along the seafront so quickly, haven't been able to find a hotel provider to complete their site, whether we'll actually manage to find somebody who is willing to invest in the Smack Boys building. We do hope they are, because it's definitely in need of support and refurbishment, and we'd like to see it used better than it is at the moment. But the separation of that money would be our particular concern, and it would be really helpful if we could have a bit more information on that. Thank you.
Well, in a minute I'll throw that to Mr Humber, because I'm sure he's desperate to speak about it. But I absolutely understand that you can interpret this report as money being moved from two of the projects in the harbour to support the port. As I said, there's no decision being taken here. We haven't made that decision. What we've tried to do is set out a reasonable worst-case scenario around the port infrastructure, and to make clear that we're not going to fall into the trap of committing very large sums of money to a project which won't actually deliver anything because nobody wants to come and use it. And I absolutely understand the scepticism that surrounded the port previously, but the world has changed, and the situation and the demand for the Port of Ramsgate is different now. I'm confident about that. The previous administration was confident about that. That doesn't mean to say that we will spend any amount of money in order to make the port work. Clearly we won't do that. We will look at the benefits and the merits for Ramsgate and Thanet and for the country as a whole, because I think we all recognise that there is a problem at Dover. But it is not the case that the projects which we're struggling to take forward, and in the case of Smackboy is not able to take forward in the way that we envisaged, are being downgraded or downsized in order to move money to the port. That's not what has happened or is happening. There are challenges with those projects, and we have to recognise those challenges. So, as I say, no decisions tonight. We're informing people. I'm glad you like the information. I hope we're going to be able to do something similar for Margate and have some good news in that as well. And I'll bring in Mr. Humber to talk about splitting out the costs, as you put it.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. So, in terms of the process and what we're going through at the moment and what the report refers to, and it mentions a date of June for having more information on the costs, and that's because we're currently tendering for some more survey work, and that will provide us with more detail on the estimate of the cost of the works. And I think at that time we will share that back via a report to Cabinet to be clear about what we're talking about for the cost of the works. Is that sorry, Councillor, is that what you're asking for specifically when you talk about the costs for the works for the ferry? Because that's the works to the mooring spine, the two berths, and also the landside infrastructure. That's what we're talking about, I think, isn't it? Rather than the other statutory harbour authority parts.
Mayor Leader, I was asking about what is it we are statutorily obliged to provide because we have a port and harbour, and what costs might we be incurring for a ferry service, and to try to separate those out, because those are things that residents are concerned to understand the difference between the two.
Okay, so the port as it currently stands has berth infrastructure. There's the wind farm berths, the two ro-ro berths, and berth 4, 5 for aggregates. As a harbour authority, we're whatever services that we provide for the customers, for the type of port it is, then we must maintain those, and there's costs associated with that. It depends on the business of the port. We're not, for example, we're not a container port, so we don't have the facilities for that. So if we have the facilities and we're using them, then there's a cost. Yes, so that exactly that. So under the Luff project, we are proposing to make the port ready again with modern facilities for ro-ro, roll and roll off services. So that is the subject of that survey work on those facilities, to bring those to a modern good standard for a period of time while we offer a port concession. So they're the costs that we will share when we've got those later on this year.
20.1, Councillor. Yes,
Thank you, Leader. Where to begin? The amount of questions this report raises, we're not going to get through tonight, but I've got several issues I'd like to perhaps try and get to the bottom of, and to highlight to Cabinet. The issues are becoming conflated here, because we've got the issue of whether the port works, and many of us have got a view on that. However, let's assume that these expressions of interest are valid, etc., etc. Why are we conflating, for example, berths 2 and 3 with levelling up projects? Berth 2 and 3 exist, and I've got a very real question that I think every single person on this Cabinet should be asking, and that's, why do they need anything doing to them when they had 1.6 million spent on 3 emergency decisions in 2015-16? 1.6 million emergency decisions that bypass scrutiny. We are now being asked to believe that they need substantial money spending on them, and £100,000 is being spent on the tender to create that report. In addition, I'd like to point out that in June 22, a further report was conducted into the condition of Berth 2, which has never been published, despite us asking for it. There is something very amiss here, either incompetence or something very wrong. 1.6 million, and we're now being asked to look at spending more. Where's that money coming from? If it comes from the Levelling Up Fund, that's there to provide levelling up benefits to the community, not to subsidise other people's errors or to tart up what's not being used. Bearing in mind that you can't get vessels in at the current depths because it's not dredged properly. Let's then move on from that, because there are very serious questions there. However, there is also contradiction in these reports about who is responsible for maintenance. We've just had the debacle of 2.5 million nearly being wasted on berth, and I'm going to say berth 4, because you can't actually get onto berth 5 because it's a beach. That debacle, dragged on for 3 years, is still subject to investigation from Grant Thornton, the external auditors, and here we are ploughing straight down the same route again, throwing money after money at berths. That, by the way, berth 3 has not been used, and maybe someone can answer, is it currently commissioned or not, because it seems not. So having had £1 million thereabouts spent on it 6 years ago, it now needs another fortune. Don't believe it. I do not believe it, and the residents do not believe it. So we need some robust answers to some robust questions here, and I'm sorry to be throwing this at you, but these are vital points. With regard to the Smack Boys home, I asked, I believe it was ONS, could we please guarantee that the building would be preserved and protected because of its intrinsic value within the harbour estate and the fact it's grade 2 star listed. I was told that could only happen because there has to be some sort of yield or outcome from the application of levelling up funds. Firstly, we need then to be creative and stop relying on rehashes of old projects, because this Bijou Hotel has come up 3 times now with different funding applications. It was proven about 5 or 6 years ago as being eyewash, and yet we're supposed to believe that it was cobbled together hastily for the levelling up bid. Not so. So levelling up, well, we need some robust answers, and we need to know what is levelling up, because I'm going to ask you the question. Is it appropriate use of levelling up money to subsidise organisations like Border Force and their infrastructure? I do not believe it to be appropriate use of the levelling up money, and I think the whole thing needs looking at as to how this Regeneration Partnership Board is going to conduct itself, and also, you know, what were you going to deliver for 3.1 million or 6 million, whatever the original budget was? We're expected now to believe that 10 million plus 25% leeway, 25%! In a commercial environment, if I asked for 25% leeway on a budget that I was putting in for, I'd be laughed out the door. But let's look at it, potentially 12.5 million now to deliver what was supposedly 6 million. Something isn't adding up here, and it's the same old story as we've had on berths 4 and 5 and this port all the way through. There are alternative uses for that 32 acres that could be yielding vast sums of money, jobs and opportunity to the community. And ploughing down a row unaccompanied freight is not it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Just to deal with your point about 10 million, 12.5 million, the truth is we don't know what the cost of getting the infrastructure into an appropriate state to receive a ferry service is, and that's why we're doing the work. We put that figure out there because that's our best estimate. We're not saying that we're going to find 10 million or 12.5 million. We've said we think that's what it looks like. I wasn't here in 2015-16, so I will have to rely on Mr. Humber to tell us about the works that were carried out to the berths. So I'll hand over to him.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, and thank you, Councillor, for the questions. And I've sort of made a few notes as you went through those, so I'll try and briefly answer each point as you've made it. So the first thing I think was the berth 2-3 and why we're now revisiting that. But as you point out, it's 2016, so it's very nearly 8 years ago. So those works were done, those refurbishment works, and there is a need to do more work, and that's you know it's some time ago now. You mentioned about whether they're in commission or not. Berth 2 is in commission and being used. Berth 3 was decommissioned from use in 2019, this work is proposed to bring it back into commission. You're right that in 2022 there was a condition report undertaken on the berths. That was very much from the viewpoint of scoping, so that has helped us with the quite complex tender that we've put out now for the design, for the survey and design work, which is above water, below water, and that initial survey, which forms part of the tender pack, and it's intended to form part of the tender pack, which has gone out now and is currently live as a tender. Dredging you mentioned, and yes, you're correct in that the port is fairly shoal, i.e. There is quite a lot of deposited material, but that's recognised in the 24-25 budget, and there's further there's an increase in the budget in the draft 24-25 budget for the port for maintenance dredging because of that, so that we'll be able to achieve more dredging next year as a result of that. Just sticking on the port items, the mention that subsidising border force. Of course, border force facilities are trader provided, so it's the statutory harbour authority that must provide those facilities, and the border force provide the staffing for that, and the statutory harbour authority provide the facilities. So that's set out in statute in the Immigration Act. I think if there's anything else, happy to cover that.
I think Mr. Carmichael wishes to say something.
It's a point on the reference to Berthwall 5 and Grant Thornton's interest in it. I don't believe there is any interest anymore. Matt, if you'd like to confirm. What happened on that was that there was a recommendation from the independent monitoring officer to conduct a review into what happened on Berthwall 5. Chris Blundell and I commissioned the internal auditors to do that review, and we reported that to Cabinet and to Council in March of last year, and the conclusion was it wasn't, to be honest, the Council's finest hour, but there were a number of recommendations, all of which we accepted, to do with project management improvements, and we're working through those now. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. And I think I've got Councillor Pugh.
Thank you, Chair. There I was worried that you'd forgotten about me. So, there we are. I'd like to thank officers for bringing this report forward. I mean, it's quite an extensive document, and I'm sure this has taken quite a lot of time. And equally as well, as has been mentioned, I think by Councillor Austin, the members' briefing that was held last week, admittedly, I know that it was short notice, and that has been admitted by officers in the planning of that, but I think it was really important to have that members' briefing, because it's important that all councillors understand not just the implications for the Levelling Up funds, but everything and the cost pressures that are coming into this. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate briefings from officers and from the Shadow Cabinet in relation to this. I do have a few questions in relation to a few parts of the report, and I appreciate that there are cost pressures that are coming in with a lot of trying to deliver with this Levelling Up fund. Those risks, and some of those risks were present, maybe not as evident to us when we were in control of the council, considering the level of inflation that we're experiencing now. But we were still aware of certain risks at the time. I just have a few questions, in that particularly to do with the fishing facilities. So it's been stated in the report that there was engagement in autumn of last year, and that the Thanet Fisheries Association, or Fishermen's Association, had expressed that they don't want the facility to come forward. My question is, and I appreciate that there's probably been meetings going backwards and forwards, and I welcome it, Leader, that you're going to be meeting with the TFA, and I think that's really important to hear it from them as well. But my question is that have we had confirmation from them, from the Ramsgate fishermen in writing, that they don't want to bring forward the processing facility? I think it's really important, if, as the report states, that the fishing industry is in I hope, a temporary decline at the moment in Ramsgate. I think that if it is, then surely this is the time when, if there is funding available from the Levelling Up Fund, we need to be trying to support them as much as possible, whether that be delivering the entire facility or an aspect of it, or moving the the moorings and all of that. I think this probably isn't the time for us to then just put our hands up and go, well, if it's in decline, then there's not much that we can do. So my question is that have we had that confirmation in writing? Because it's all fine us having meetings with them, but I think going forward, if that is something that then isn't going to be delivered, I think we really need to make sure that that's as watertight as it needs to be. The other questions that I have is that, particularly in relation to the funding or projected funding that's needed for improvements to the port. Yes, you'll be surprised to hear, not compared to the agenda on the potential for a gypsy and traveller site in Shotton Road. I am going to concede that yes, it was the previous administration that put forward the report and accepted the report to open up the tender process for an operator on the port. I stand by that decision. I think it's really important that residents and us as a council have clarity on what potential operators and what could be done with the port. I think it's not fair for us to keep kind of going round in circles and maintaining an asset if it's not then necessarily generating an income for the council or for the betterment of residents. So I think that's really important. I just want to be clear on that. My only question is that if an operator is secured for the port, a suitable operator, one that can bring, I'm not saying that we agree to just anything for the sake of it, but one that can bring benefits to the area, surely it's important that we wait until we understand what it is that operator wants to do in the port, because I appreciate that one operator may want to focus on restoring ro-ro services and another operator may want to focus on bringing in and out and freight and you know, I know there's a lot of interesting ideas banded around that. So surely for the time being we should completely wait, and I know that it does reference this in the report, but I just want confirmation from Cabinet tonight that we will absolutely wait until there's an idea of whether there's a suitable operator for the port. But what I would like to propose is that we wait until we have secured an operator so that we ensure that we know what their needs are, so that we're not committing any funding from the Levelling Up Fund that's allocated for something else before we understand that. My final question is, and apologies, I'm not trying to put officers on the spot, but it's been referenced in the report that there isn't any suitable funding elsewhere from council budgets to allow for this extra spend that needs to be done on the report. And my question is that is there any capacity for us to apply to the Public Loans Board for an asset such as this, if it does need this much work, for us to put forward for that? Now, if there isn't, then that's absolutely fine, but I thought that I'd ask. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you, Councillor Pugh, and I think that it's fair to say that when we were in opposition, we supported the proposal that was brought forward, and obviously we brought forward the Levelling Up proposals in the first place. So I think we've always been on the same page as regards the port, and I think that is drawn of the experience, respective experience of former Councillor Ashby and myself, in terms of the interest in using the port. Nothing ideological about it. I think that we believe it can work. I think in terms of borrowing money, and I know Mr. Thanet will be chomping at the bit to get involved. The trouble with borrowing money is that there are revenue costs to repaying it, and probably we don't have scope in our revenue budget to repay significant loans for port infrastructure. I'll let you cover it in a minute, Mr. Thanet. I don't think there's any proposal to spend Levelling Up money that's allocated to anything else until we are clear where we're going in respect of the port infrastructure, and absolutely we want to hear what people want to do, and the two processes need to be aligned, and I'm relying on Mr. Humber to do that, and I know that's certainly his intention. And in respect of the fishers, yeah, I do want to go and hear from them myself. Unfortunately, Miss Askey is not here this evening. She might be able to answer your question about whether we've got something in writing. I'm not going to ask other officers about that. But I think it's absolutely important that we support the fishing fleet in Ramsgate. I understand that there are 8 boats operating. If we're going to build them a £4 million facility, that's quite a big responsibility for them to meet the running costs of. But if we can't do that, and we probably can't because they probably can't sustain it, we do need to talk to them about how we can support them and try and make sure that we don't end up with no fishing fleet in Ramsgate, because that will be a very sad day, and I don't think any of us want to see that. There is some funds in the levelling up that we can use to support the fishers, and we need to find out how we can best do that by having further conversations. But I know there's a lot of work already been done by officers, and it's important that we do that. And now I'm going to let Mr. Sanham speak.
Thank you, Chair. It's not that we can't approach the Public Works Loan Board to borrow money, it's that it's kind of the perfect storm at the moment with regards to borrowing. Is the interest rates are the worst that they've been for probably the last 10, 15 years in terms of borrowing. So the anticipated revenue costs associated with borrowing, even if it's a £2.5 million gap, is about £400,000 per annum that we would need to find as savings to facilitate that, because that's not based anywhere. And obviously that's on 2.5 million. If it goes up from there, that increases. So we just haven't got the impact, because when you look at 25, 26, 27, which is when the funding would be required, the budget proposal in terms of the MTFS already shows that there's potential savings requirement in that year, and we would just be adding to that position.
And I think it's worth saying that we would look to see if there's opportunity to recover some of the costs of this work through the contract with the operator. But what we didn't want to say is that we're attributing a chunk of these costs to the operator up front, because we need to have an open process and understand what it is people want to do at the port, and what they can afford to support in terms of the infrastructure. So, members, I'm not sure that I actually asked for a seconder on this item, but Councillor Yates has volunteered. Does anybody wish to say, Councillor Yates?
Yeah, it was just, we mentioned the Port of Dover earlier, and I just thought it'd be worth highlighting that there's going to be some changes to the requirements at Dover in October of this year. I was actually with the Kent County Council Highways Manager earlier this afternoon, who's responsible for the EU transition, and new rules are being implemented in October this year, which include fingerprint and facial recognition. So I think it's worth noting the context of this, that Dover is likely to be heavily impacted with those rules in October. And although this project could take a number of years, there is concern about Dover and its ability to deal with that. And it's likely that every passenger car going through is going to have an iPad brought in to scan your face and do a fingerprint. And how that's dealt with on individual cases is very interesting, especially if you're a brickie and your fingerprints aren't quite as visible as others. So, yeah, I think the context of those new rules, I just wanted to mention, because it is quite seriously being looked at. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Yates. Members, any other comments? Okay, so this is going to scrutiny, where obviously there will be further opportunities to ask questions. I shall remind members of the recommendations. 1, to note the progress achieved in the delivery of the approved Ramsgate regeneration programmes. 2, note that further reports will be received authorising specific procurement activities as each respective project reaches that stage, and setting out the project deliverables, timelines and costs. 3, note the proposed monitoring and reporting arrangements set out in section 6. 4, note the current funding gap in the programme. And 5, refer this report to the overview and scrutiny panel and subsequently consider any comments made by the panel. Do members agree? Thank you. And we move on to item 12, which is Dane Park Waste Depot Waste. You can have that one, Councillor Alban.
How kind, Chair. Save the best till last day. This report to Cabinet is on an issue that was particularly concerning, and but it needs to come because of the amount of money that it's cost. And I just want to go through some points. There's only 20 of the points, so just bear with me. The head of Coastal and Public Realm started in his role in September. The officer was tasked with installing 5 electric vehicle charging points at Dane Park Depot. During a site visit to the depot, the officer found large waste piles where the points, the electric charging points would have been installed. The waste came from grounds maintenance of open spaces across the district. The council was the council was storing 2,180 tonnes of waste at the depot. The depot has what's called a T23 waste exemption certificate for 60 tonnes of waste. And this waste must be suitable for composting. The council waste consultant was asked to advise on the waste at the depot. The consultant confirmed the waste at the depot exceeded that allowed, obviously by the size of it. Further, they confirmed the council was at risk of sanctions being imposed by the Environment Agency. The consultant advised that courts can issue substantial fines and custodial sentences for non-compliance with waste activities. The corporate management team agreed the immediate action should be taken to remove the waste from the site and dispose of it through a compliant waste disposal service. I was also part of that decision-making process. An estimated cost of £225,000 for the work was provided by Mears, which is a company that the council does a lot of work with. Due to the estimated cost of the agreement to remove the waste was a decision that officers could enter into without it having to come to Cabinet. Given the urgency of remedying this issue, it was agreed by the Section 151 officer that a contract could be entered into with the Identified Waste Disposal Service without the usual procurement process. Works commenced removing all of the waste in late November. This was completed within a matter of weeks. Officers were then advised that the final cost of the waste removal was £275,000 and approval for that is now being sought. Officers have put in place measures that will ensure the depot is compliant with its T23 waste exemption certificate going forward. What I can advise is that, although it's not within the report, but I think it should be said, that the £275,000 has been taken from the risk reserves. But what I would also say is that should that waste have been removed, over the period of time that it was there, it would cost about the same amount of money that has been used to remove it. And we believe, although we're not sure, we have looked at Google Earth and to see how this mound of 2,000 tonnes of grass, etc., was growing. We believe it's been there for about 4 years and growing. So what I would also say is that the Environment Agency was advised about this as soon as possible, and we have been contacted by the Environment Agency, and they have advised that no retrospective action is to be taken by them in relation to this. I'm confident, and I thank the head of service, Mr. Marmo, for seeing this, sorting it out and getting things done to remove it. But I would say it is embarrassing for the council, and it shouldn't have happened. And the only reason that I can foresee, that I can see, sorry, not foresee, I've been forward. The only thing that I could see with this, it was a time which coincided with this waste building up was when we never had an open spaces manager looking over the staff and ensuring these things were done. And nothing was reported to anywhere. And so this is an important matter to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And I'm sure by our head of service and our director that things have now been put in place, and you can see from the report itself what the costings are. They've been separated out in the report and how it's come to that amount of money. So, Chair, I'm recommending as follows, that Cabinet approve. The Cabinet ratifies the decision made by the Section 151 officer on the 16th of November 2024 to enter into a contract with the estimated value of £225,000 with Mears for the removal of the disposal of the waste from Dane Park Depot. The Cabinet approves the payment of additional £50,000 based on the final cost of removal disposal of the waste from Dane Park Depot being £275,000. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Alban. Is there a seconder? Councillor Keane. And I will say that I don't think any member of this council would think that this situation which has been uncovered by Mr Marmo was in any way acceptable or defensible or appropriate. And we have to be grateful that Mr Marmo joined us and was alert to the issue that it created, and I think also aware that this matter is a consequence of roles not being filled within the council, positions not being occupied by officers over a period of time. It clearly has gone on for a very long while. I don't think there's any point in pointing fingers at different administrations. Members would be challenged to understand some of the environmental regulations, I think, but nevertheless it's just not good enough. And I shall call in Councillor Austin, who I'm sure has a similar opinion. Thank you.
Absolutely, Chair, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Alban. I wanted to extend my sympathies to Mr Marmo starting in a new role and finding this on his doorstep, and thank him for his efforts in sorting this out. I've got two questions. The first one is, in view of the Council's climate change commitments and in view of the small capacity of the store at Dane Park, are we planning in the future to defray the costs of the new chipper, etc., by selling compost, selling mulch, anything of that kind? I know Mr Elmer has talked about gathering up leaves from various places and composting them, etc. Is there a bit of a side business that we can be doing here? Because I'm sure we have residents with allotments and so on who would be delighted to purchase those sorts of items at modest cost. And the second question is from a community perspective. One of the things that has always happened at Dane Park Depot is that garden waste from all the various gardening groups, volunteer gardening groups that we absolutely rely on across the district, that waste has been gathered up and taken to Dane Park Depot and disposed of by the council, which it strikes me as the least that the council can do. Will we still have the facility to do that in future? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Austin. To take your second point first, the answer to that is yes. We continue to do that, and we will continue with that. Oh. Thank you for. I couldn't feel it. Normally, I can feel it in the back of my neck, but yes, I will.
The answer is that currently we cannot allow any waste to come to the depot because we don't have a permit to allow that to happen. We're currently working on that permit. It normally takes about 6 months to 12 months to get that permit. So as it stands at the moment, the staff at the depot have been instructed to help the volunteer groups and the parish and town councils that work on our land to deposit the waste directly to the local waste disposal company that we use, and obviously the council pays for that. But we had an instance today where I had a phone call where they had to ask somebody to not stay at the site and not dispose of their waste at the site, and they actually had to take the waste away and then take it to that company. It is intended that in the long run what we're trying to do is to work through the various different exemptions that you can get, plus the permit that will take a lot longer. So we can't say we will end up in a position where we will be able to take the waste at the site, but we're trying to work towards that.
Yeah, I'm so pleased that I got that wrong. So it just shows you how closely we work together. No, I just assume, I wrongly assume, because we've always done it, that we will continue to do it. But I fall to better. I'm just the bloke who's speaking in a microphone, really. No, it is an important thing, and it is important that we continue to ensure that we look after the volunteers, and we will do that in the best way that we can, and hopefully it won't take 12 months to get another licence or whatever is needed, but I certainly will do that. The other point, Councillor Austin, was in relation to climate change.
Compost and mulch, we've got all the materials there. Are we using them and planning on selling them?
Yeah, no. This time I could feel the heat from behind. I had no intention of answering you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Alban. What we're very conscious of at the moment is that we don't want to be back in rule territory, which we could be in breach of things. So I would have to take that away and work with the consultant that we're currently working with to make sure that we are absolutely where we need to be. Obviously, we would always want to be trying to maximise the climate emergency and climate change scenarios. So I'll definitely take that away and have a look at it.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to put on the record a sincere thanks to Tony Marmo for actually knowing his job, because it seems that, now we know it's 4 years this muck's been piling up for, or debris. Whilst there have been periods without open spaces managers, I think that's one of the departments that we've got a record for recruiting more than any others for, and 4 or 5 came and went over that period. I do think we've had a lucky escape from the sounds of it, and I do hope and trust that the relevant action will be taken to take, what's the word I want, restorative action with those responsible, because, I would imagine they've got a Labrador next to them if they didn't notice 4 times 60 tonnes was something odd. There will be people in this authority that have just allowed this to go on, and how many other issues do we have to have? We're £250,000. It's granted, some of that would have been spent with the disposal of the waste, as has been pointed out, but there are additional costs. We've had a lucky escape. Someone's responsible somewhere.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Do
Leader,
you want to reply to that, Councillor Alban?
I'm not sure there was an actual question there to answer, but what I would say is that tonnage that was taken away, it is grass, there's no building material, there's nothing like that, and it's purely that which. So you imagine the size of the mound for this, and you probably see it from the top of Everest. But anyway, that was taken away and is used as compost. Very green, Councillor Austin. You'll be pleased to hear. Well, if you want green, you can't make money. Let's be favourite. No, we won't get into that. But anyway, thank you, Chair.
Okay, I think that we have to recognise that this has arisen. It is obviously by definition a legacy issue, and I think that part of the reason it's arisen has been the senior management situation within this council over the past 4 years. We're not in that place now. I'm very confident about the officers we've got in place now. You know, I am embarrassed for the council that we've got this item on the agenda this evening. I think it tells a poor story, but I am equally confident that we have now got the people in place to advise us properly and deliver services in the proper way. And I don't think there's any point in hunting around for individuals who are probably no longer here to blame for what has happened.